On Christmas Eve, the doorbell rang. It was a pregnant girl. "Do you have any water?" my husband yelled. "We're not a shelter." "Get lost," my daughter-in-law sneered. "She'll contaminate the food." I slammed the table. "Said another place. She's eating with us." They were furious, embarrassed. Then, at dinner, she revealed a birthmark that made my husband go white. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The doorbell rang at exactly 6:15 on Christmas Eve, cutting through the warm hum of conversation in our dining room like a knife through butter. I was arranging the final touches on our holiday table, straightening the burgundy napkins I'd ironed twice when that sound pierced the comfortable bubble I'd spent all day creating. "Are you expecting someone else?" Damien asked from his spot at the head of the table, barely looking up from his phone. At 71, my husband had perfected the art of appearing busy while doing absolutely nothing. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back the way he'd worn it for 40 years, and his reading glasses perched on his nose made him look distinguished, or so he liked to think. "No one I know of," I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. The scent of rosemary and garlic from our Christmas roast filled the air, mixing with the pine fragrance from our tree in the corner. Everything was perfect, exactly as I'd planned. Alina, my daughter-in-law, looked up from her wine glass with that practiced expression of mild annoyance she'd perfected over the 5 years since she married my son James. "Probably carolers," she said, her voice carrying that slight edge it always had when our routine was interrupted. "Just ignore them. They'll go away." At 34, Alina had the kind of sharp beauty that photographs well but feels cold in person. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect shiny, not a strand out of place, and her red dress probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. She'd been checking her reflection in the silver serving spoons all evening. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. "I'll get it," I said, already moving toward the front door. James, my 43-year-old son, was deep in conversation with his father about some investment opportunity I didn't understand and probably couldn't afford. Neither of them seemed to notice the interruption. When I opened the front door, the December cold hit my face immediately, carrying with it the scent of snow that hadn't quite decided to fall. Standing on my porch was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with long brown hair that hung in damp waves around her shoulders. She was pregnant, visibly, so probably 7 or 8 months along, and she was shivering in a thin coat that had seen better days. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice soft but steady. "Do you have any water? I've been walking for hours and I'm so thirsty." Behind me, I heard chair legs scraping against the hardwood floor. Damien's voice boomed from the dining room loud enough that I knew he intended for the girl to hear him. "We're not a shelter. Tell whoever it is to get lost. This is Christmas Eve." For crying out loud, I felt heat rise in my cheeks. In 45 years of marriage, Damien's capacity for callousness still managed to surprise me sometimes. I looked at this young woman, really looked at her. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was something in them that reminded me of myself at that age. Not the features exactly, but the expression, the way she held herself, despite being obviously exhausted and cold. Pride mixed with desperation. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, out of the cold." "Mom! What are you doing?" James appeared in the hallway, his face creased with concern. He'd inherited his father's height, but thankfully my softer features. At 43, he was successful in his accounting firm, married to a woman who looked good on paper and completely lacking in the compassion I'd tried to raise him with. Alina appeared beside him, her wine glass still in hand. When she saw the girl, her face twisted into an expression of pure disgust. "Are you insane, Muriel? She could have diseases. She'll contaminate our food." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way Alina said, "contaminate," like this young woman was garbage. Maybe it was the dismissive tone in Damien's voice from the other room. Or maybe it was the way the girl's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly when Alina spoke. I slammed my hand down on the small table in our entryway hard enough that the ceramic bowl holding our keys rattled. Everyone froze. "Set another place," I said, my voice carrying authority I hadn't used in years. "She's eating with us." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Alina's mouth fell open in a way that wasn't attractive at all. James looked like someone had just told him gravity was optional. From the dining room, I heard Damon's chair scrape again, followed by his heavy footsteps. "Muriel, have you lost your mind?" he said, as he appeared in our small entryway, his face already red with indignation. "We have a nice family dinner planned, and you want to invite some vagrant." "Her name," I interrupted. Turning to the young woman, "is what, sweetheart?" "Sophie," she said quietly, but her voice didn't shake. "Sophie Miller." "Sophie is joining us for Christmas dinner," I said, looking directly at my husband. "Anyone who has a problem with that can explain to me how turning away a pregnant woman on Christmas Eve aligns with the Christian values you claim to hold." Damien's face went through several interesting color changes. Purple was particularly prominent. "This is ridiculous, Muriel. We don't know anything about her, where she's been, what she wants." "I want to sit down," Sophie said. And for the first time since I'd opened the door, I noticed how pale she was. "Please, I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." That did it. I took her gently by the elbow and guided her toward the dining room. "James, get another chair from the kitchen." Alina set another place setting. "Damien, pour her some water." Nobody moved. I stopped walking and turned to face my family. Now there's something about the tone a mother uses when she's reached the absolute end of her patience. It's a frequency that cuts through 43 years of James learning to tune me out, through 5 years of Elena's practiced indifference, through 4 decades of Damien assuming I'll just go along with whatever he decides. James disappeared into the kitchen. Alina set down her wine glass with slightly more force than necessary and stalked over to the china cabinet. Damien muttered something under his breath about bleeding hearts, but filled a glass with ice water. I helped Sophie settle into the chair James brought from the kitchen, positioning her between my usual seat and the empty spot where my mother used to sit before she passed 3 years ago. Sophie kept her thin coat on, and I noticed her hands were chapped from the cold. "How far along are you, dear?" I asked, settling into my own chair. 7 months. Sophie replied, accepting the water glass from Damien with a quiet thank you that he didn't acknowledge. Alina returned with silverware and a plate, setting them down with more noise than necessary. "So where's the father?" she asked, her voice sharp with judgment. "Out getting high somewhere while you're wandering around looking for handouts." "Alina," I warned. "What?" It's a fair question. Single mothers don't just appear out of nowhere on Christmas Eve. Unless there's a story. Sophie's hand tightened around her water glass, but she met Alina's gaze steadily. "He's not in the picture anymore." "How convenient," Alina muttered, taking a large sip of her wine. I began serving dinner, ladling the rosemary roast onto plates, adding roasted vegetables and Yorkshire pudding. The food I'd spent all day preparing suddenly felt like props in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Every sound seemed amplified. The clink of silverware, the rustle of Sophie's coat, Alina's deliberate sighs. "So, Sophie," I said, determined to create some semblance of normally. "Where are you from?" "Originally from here in Portland," she said, cutting her meat into small, careful pieces. "I've been staying with friends recently, but..." She paused, glancing around the table. Things change. Damien was pushing food around his plate without eating, stealing glances at Sophie when he thought no one was looking. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Not curiosity exactly, but something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Friends," Alina repeated with a snort. "Let me guess. They got tired of supporting you and the baby." "That's enough," I said sharply. But Sophie shook her head. "It's okay, Mrs." She looked at me questioningly. "Patterson." Muriel Patterson. This is my husband Damien, my son James, and his wife Alina. It's okay, Mrs. Patterson. People assume things when they see someone like me. Sophie took a small bite of the Yorkshire pudding and smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. This is delicious. Thank you. Something warm settled in my chest. My mother's recipe. She always said food made with love tastes different. My mother used to say the same thing, Sophie said softly. Used to, I asked gently. She died 6 months ago. Cancer. The simple statement hit the table like a stone thrown into still water. Even Alina had the grace to look uncomfortable. James cleared his throat and reached for his beer. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I said, and meant it. I knew what it was like to lose a mother too early to face the world without that particular safety net. Sophie nodded, blinking rapidly. She would have loved this, she said, gesturing around our dining room. The tree, the decorations, the family dinner. We never had much, but she always tried to make Christmas special. I glanced at our tree, standing proud in the corner, with its carefully arranged ornaments and perfectly coordinated gold and burgundy ribbons. Alina had insisted on hiring a decorator this year, saying our usual family tradition of decorating together was too chaotic. Looking at it now, it seemed beautiful, but cold. Impressive, but empty of the memories that made holidays special. Well, you're here now, I said. That's what matters. Damien set down his fork with more force than necessary. Muriel, could I speak with you in the kitchen? It wasn't really a request. I excused myself and followed him into our kitchen, where he immediately began pacing between the island and the sink like a caged animal. What the hell are you doing? He hissed, keeping his voice low but unable to hide his agitation. I'm showing basic human decency to someone who needs help. She's taking advantage of your soft heart. This is exactly how people get robbed. Muriel, or worse. I stared at my husband. This man I'd shared a bed with for 45 years and felt something cold settle in my stomach. She's a pregnant 20-year-old who asked for water. Damien, what exactly do you think she's going to steal the good china? You don't know what people are capable of these days. There was something in his voice, an edge that went beyond his usual grumpiness about disrupted plans. He kept glancing toward the dining room and his hands were shaking slightly as he ran them through his hair. Since when do you care about the good china? I asked. You've been telling me for years that I'm too sentimental about mother's things. Damien didn't answer. He just stood there, looking toward the dining room with an expression I couldn't read but didn't like. When we returned to the table, Sophie was listening politely as James explained his latest golf tournament victory. Alina was scrolling through her phone, probably posting pictures of her perfectly plated dinner to social media. Sophie caught my eye and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her face light up. Thank you, she mouthed silently. I nodded and settled back into my chair, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in our house tonight. Something that went deeper than unexpected dinner guests or disrupted holiday traditions. As I watched Sophie eat her dinner with obvious hunger but perfect manners. As I noticed the way she instinctively protected her belly with one hand while she ate with the other, I found myself wondering about her story. Not the judgmental wondering that Alina was doing, but genuine curiosity about this young woman who carried herself with such dignity despite obvious hardship. And I couldn't stop noticing the way Damien kept looking at her when he thought no one was watching. The way his face had gone pale when she'd first walked into our dining room. Sophie reached for her water glass and pushed up her sleeve slightly. On her wrist, just visible below the cuff of her worn sweater, was a birthmark, a crescent moon-shaped dark against her pale skin. The exact same birthmark my husband had on his shoulder. The rest of Christmas Eve dinner passed in a haze of forced conversation and growing unease. I couldn't stop thinking about that birthmark. Couldn't stop watching the way Damon's hands trembled every time he reached for his water glass. Sophie seemed oblivious to the tension, eating with obvious relief and answering James' questions about Portland with the kind of detailed knowledge that only comes from growing up somewhere. "Oh, I know that area," she said when James mentioned his old high school. "My mom used to clean houses in that neighborhood when I was little. Beautiful homes. I always wondered what it would be like to live in one of them." Something flickered across Damien's face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. He cleared his throat and excused himself to the bathroom, but I noticed he was gone for nearly 10 minutes. When he came back, his face was flushed and he wouldn't meet my eyes. After dinner, I insisted that Sophie stay for dessert. Alina had made her disapproval clear through a series of dramatic sighs and pointed looks, but I didn't care. There was something about this girl that had awakened every protective instinct I possessed. Maybe it was her obvious vulnerability. Or maybe it was the way she'd thanked me for the Yorkshire pudding, like it was the finest meal she'd ever eaten. "I should probably go," Sophie said, as I began clearing the dinner plates. "I don't want to overstay my welcome." "Nonsense," I said firmly. "It's Christmas Eve. No one should be alone on Christmas Eve." Alina snorted. "Some people prefer to be alone. Maybe that's why she's in this situation in the first place." The cruelty in my daughter-in-law's voice made my stomach turn. I'd always known Alina was self-centered, but I'd never seen her be deliberately vicious before. Sophie's face flushed, but she didn't respond. "Alina," James said quietly, "that's enough." Is it Alina turned on her husband with the kind of sharp fury that had been simmering all evening. "Your mother invites a complete stranger into our home, and I'm supposed to pretend that's normal. We don't know anything about her, James. She could be on drugs. She could be dangerous. She's pregnant, and she asked for water." I interrupted. "Since when is basic human kindness considered dangerous?" Alina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Basic human kindness. Muriel, you're being manipulated. This girl shows up here with some soba story about dead mothers and absent fathers, and you immediately open your home to her. It's pathetic." The word pathetic hung in the air like a slap. Sophie pushed back from the table, her face pale. "I should go," she said again, more firmly this time. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Patterson. It was lovely. You'll do no such thing," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I turned to face Alina, and for the first time in 5 years, I let her see exactly what I thought of her. That young woman is a guest in my home. If you can't treat her with basic respect, you're welcome to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. James looked mortified. Even Damien, who'd been unusually quiet since returning from the bathroom, stared at me with something approaching shock. "Excuse me." Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. "You heard me." I was trembling, but not with fear. With 45 years of suppressed anger at watching my family treat people like inconveniences. This is my home, and Sophie is my guest. If you have a problem with that, there's the door. For a moment I thought Alina might actually leave. Her face went through several interesting color changes, and her perfectly manicured fingers clenched around her wine glass so tightly I was afraid it might shatter. Instead, she stood up abruptly and stalked into the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood with sharp, angry sounds. James followed her, muttering apologies under his breath, though whether they were for his mother or his wife, I couldn't tell. That left Sophie, Damien, and me sitting around our dining table, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas dinner and enough tension to choke on. "I really should go," Sophie said quietly. "I don't want to cause problems in your family. You're not causing anything," I assured her. "Some people just don't handle change well." Damien made a sound that might have been agreement, but when I looked at him, he was studying Sophie with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Not the way James had been looking at her with polite curiosity, but with something deeper, something that looked almost like fear. "Sophie," he said suddenly, his voice rough, "where did you say you grew up?" The question seemed innocent enough, but there was something in Damien's tone that made both Sophie and me look at him more closely. Southeast Portland, Sophie replied. Near Mount Tabor. Why Damon's face went white, completely white, like someone had just drained all the blood from his body. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles stood out like mountain peaks. Are you all right? I asked, reaching toward him instinctively. Fine, he said quickly. Too quickly, just tired. It's been a long day. But he wasn't fine. He was staring at Sophie like she was a ghost. And his breathing had become shallow and rapid. I'd seen Damien handle business crises, family emergencies, even my mother's death with more composure than he was showing right now. Mount Tabor's a nice area, I said, carefully watching my husband's face. Very family-oriented. Sophie nodded. Mom always said she chose it because she wanted me to grow up somewhere safe. She worked really hard to keep us in that neighborhood. What did your mother do for work? Damon asked, and his voice cracked slightly on the word mother. She cleaned houses mostly. Sometimes she worked at the hospital laundry when things got tight. She never complained, though. She always said she was building something for us. Each word seemed to hit Damien like a physical blow. Sweat had broken out across his forehead, despite the fact that our dining room was comfortably cool. What was her name? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Sophie smiled for the first time since Elena's outburst. Elena. Elena Martinez before she married my dad. Elena Miller after. Though Dad wasn't around long enough for the name change to matter much, I watched my husband's face actually crumble like a building being demolished in slow motion. His breathing became ragged and he pushed back from the table so suddenly that his chair fell over backward. I need some air, he muttered, stumbling toward the back door that led to our patio. Sophie and I sat in stunned silence, listening to the door slam behind him. Is he okay? Sophie asked, genuine concern in her voice. Should I call someone? I stared at the door. My husband had just rushed through my mind, racing. Elena Martinez, Mount Tabor. The way Damien had reacted to Sophie's presence from the moment she walked through our door. The birthmark I'd noticed on her wrist. 20 years ago, Damon had gone through what he'd called a midlife crisis. He'd started working late, going to business conferences in cities that didn't seem to have much business relevance, taking long drives on weekends to clear his head. I'd suspected there might be another woman, but I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. After all, we'd been married for 25 years at that point. We had James to think about, and Damien had always been devoted to his family, or so I told myself. Mrs. Patterson. Sophie's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? I looked at this young woman sitting at my dining table. This beautiful girl, with her dark eyes and her crescent moon birthmark and her memories of a mother named Elena who'd worked so hard to give her daughter a good life. This girl who'd grown up in the same neighborhood where Damien had taken all those long contemplative drives. Sophie. I said slowly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. How old are you exactly? I'll be 21 in March, she replied. Why 21 in March? Which meant she'd been born in March of 2003, which meant she'd been conceived in the summer of 2002. The same summer Damien had started taking those long drives. The same summer he'd begun working late and attending mysterious conferences. The same summer I'd started finding charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never been to and hotels in cities he claimed to be visiting for business. My hands were shaking as I reached for my water glass. The ice had long since melted, leaving the water lukewarm and unsatisfying. Sophie. I said, not sure if I really wanted to know the answer to the question I was about to ask. Do you have any other family, anyone you could stay with? She shook her head. It's just been me and Mom since I was little. She had a sister once, but they lost touch years ago. Mom never talked much about family. She always said we were enough for each other. Elena and Sophie, a mother and daughter who'd been enough for each other, while Elena cleaned other people's houses, and Sophie grew up wondering what it would be like to live in the beautiful homes her mother worked in. while Damien and I lived in our comfortable house with our successful son, never knowing that just across town there might be a little girl who shared his distinctive birthmark and his stubborn chin. From the living room came the sound of raised voices. James and Alina arguing in harsh whispers that weren't quite whispered enough. Through the back window, I could see Damien pacing on our patio like a caged animal, his hands running through his hair in a gesture I'd seen him make when he was deeply stressed. Sophie was looking around our dining room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not greed or envy, but something sadder, something that looked like longing. "Your home is beautiful," she said quietly. "Your family is lucky." Lucky, I almost laughed, but I was afraid if I started, I might not be able to stop, or I might start crying instead, which would be worse. "Sophie," I said, making a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff, "would you like to stay the night? We have a guest room and it's late, and you shouldn't be walking around Portland alone when you're so pregnant." Her eyes widened. Oh, I couldn't impose any more than I already have, especially not after. She gestured toward the living room where Alina's voice was growing louder. "You're not imposing. You're accepting hospitality that's freely offered." The truth was, I wasn't ready to let her go. Not until I understood what was happening here. Not until I figured out why my husband looked like he'd seen a ghost the moment this girl walked into our home. Sophie hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Are you sure I don't want to cause more problems? And the only problem," I said firmly, "is people who think kindness is weakness." Through the window, I watched Damien lean against our patio railing, his shoulders shaking. Whether from cold or emotion, I couldn't tell. But for the first time in 45 years of marriage, I found myself wondering if I knew my husband at all. And looking at Sophie with her Elena's eyes and Damien's birthmark, and her stories of growing up in the neighborhood where my husband had taken all those mysterious drives, I had the terrible feeling I was about to find out. I led Sophie upstairs to our guest room, my mind churning with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The room was small but comfortable, with a double bed covered in one of my mother's quilts and a window that looked out over our neighbor's garden. I'd always kept it ready for visitors, though we rarely had any. "The bathroom is right across the hall," I told her, setting fresh towels on the dresser. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold." Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the quilt's intricate pattern. "This is beautiful work. Did you make it?" "My mother did. She made one for each of us kids when we got married. Said it would keep us warm when times got hard." She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. I paused in the doorway, studying Sophie's profile in the soft lamplight. "Sophie, can I ask you something personal?" She looked up, those dark eyes so earnest it made my chest ache. "Of course. Your father, the one who wasn't around long, what was his name?" Something flickered across her face. There and gone so quickly, I almost missed it. Mom always told me his name was David Miller. But she hesitated, then shook her head. I've never been sure she was telling me the truth about him. My mouth went dry. "What makes you say that, little things?" The way she changed the subject when I asked questions. How she never had any pictures of him. Never talked about how they met. When I got older, I started thinking maybe Miller wasn't even his real last name. Maybe it was just easier for her to give me a name than to explain that she didn't know who my father was. I gripped the door frame to steady myself. Elena Martinez had given her daughter a false name, for her father had kept his identity secret for 20 years. And now that daughter was sitting in my guest room, carrying his grandchild and bearing his distinctive birthmark. "Sophie," I said carefully. "That mark on your wrist, you've had it since birth." She glanced down at her wrist, where the sleeve of her sweater had ridden up again, exposing the crescent-shaped birthmark. "Oh, this, yes, always." Mom used to say it was my moon mark, that it meant I was special. She smiled sadly. She had all sorts of little stories like that. I think she wanted to make sure I never felt different or ugly because of it. "It's not ugly at all," I said quietly. "It's actually quite distinctive. That's what Mom always said. She told me that someday I might meet someone else with the same mark, and that would mean something important." Sophie's voice grew wistful. "I used to imagine it would be my father, that we'd recognize each other somehow. The irony was so sharp it cut. She had met someone with the same mark. He was downstairs on our patio, probably having a panic attack. "Get some rest, sweetheart," I managed. "We'll talk more in the morning." I closed her door softly and stood in the hallway for a long moment, trying to process what I just learned. Elena Martinez. David Miller, obviously a fake name. A daughter who'd grown up wondering about her father while he lived just across town, building a life that didn't include her. Downstairs, the house was eerily quiet. James and Alina had apparently taken their argument upstairs to their room, though I could still hear the occasional sharp word through their closed door. I found Damien in the kitchen sitting at our breakfast table with his head in his hands and a tumbler of whiskey in front of him. "Damien," I said quietly. He looked up, and I was shocked by how much he'd aged in the past 2 hours. The man I'd been married to for 45 years looked like he'd lived through 45 more in the space of a single evening. "Is she staying?" he asked, his voice. "Yes, in the guest room." I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table. "We need to talk, Muriel." "Elena Martinez," I said, cutting him off. "Mount Tabor, summer of 2002. Damien's face crumpled. He took a shaky sip of his whiskey and set the glass down with trembling hands. "How long have you known I didn't know?" I suspected something 20 years ago, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I kept my voice level, though. Inside, I felt like screaming. I should have trusted my instincts. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." The words came out sharper than I intended. "Explain how my husband spent the summer of 2002 having an affair with a woman named Elena Martinez. Explain how that woman had a daughter 9 months later who happens to have the same birth arc as you do. Explain how you can sit there drinking whiskey while your daughter is upstairs sleeping in our guest room." The word daughter hung between us like a bomb that had just exploded. Damon flinched as if I'd struck him. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "What wasn't supposed to happen? The affair, or the pregnancy, any of it." He looked up at me with eyes full of pain and guilt. "God, Muriel, none of it was supposed to happen." I waited, giving him space to tell me the truth, all of it. "I met Elena at a business conference. She was working for the catering company. We started talking during a break, and she was so different from anyone I'd ever known. She was working 2 jobs to put herself through community college, taking care of her sick mother, but she never complained. She was so full of life, so determined." "So you decided to sleep with her?" Damien winced. "It wasn't like that. Not at first. We just talked. I started looking forward to conferences where I knew she'd be working. Then we started meeting for coffee. Innocent stuff. When did it stop being innocent that summer? Her mother died in June, and she was devastated. She had no one else. Muriel. No family, no real support system. I wanted to help her. By having an affair with her, by being there for her," he said desperately. "But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. I don't know how to explain it. I felt like a different person when I was with her. Someone better. Someone who mattered." The pain in his voice might have moved me if I wasn't so angry. "And what about us? What about James? Did we not matter?" "Of course you mattered. You matter. That's why I ended it. When she told me she was pregnant." Damon's voice broke completely. "She said she was going to keep the baby, and I panicked. I told her I couldn't leave my family, that I couldn't be part of her life anymore. I stared at my husband, this man I'd shared my life with, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. 'You abandoned her. I gave her money. You abandoned a pregnant woman who had just lost her mother and had no one else in the world. What was I supposed to do? Damien's voice rose, desperation creeping in. Leave you. Leave James. Destroy our family for a mistake I'd made. So you made Elena and Sophie pay for your mistake instead. The silence that followed was deafening. Damien stared into his whiskey glass like it held answers he'd never find. She never contacted you, I asked finally. Never asked for help. He shook his head. I told her not to. I said if she tried to reach me, I'd deny everything. I'd make sure she couldn't prove anything. His voice dropped to a whisper. I was terrified you'd find out. Terrified of losing everything. So instead, you let Elena struggle to raise your daughter alone, while you went on with your comfortable life pretending she didn't exist. I sent money, he said weakly. For the first few years, anonymous cashier's checks. I wanted to help, but I couldn't risk. Risk what? Risk taking responsibility for your actions. Damien looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Risk losing you. The words should have softened something in me, should have reminded me that whatever else he'd done, he'd chosen our marriage, our family. Instead, they just made me angrier. You lost me the moment you betrayed our vows, Damien. You lost me the moment you abandoned a pregnant woman. You just managed to hide it from me for 20 years. Muriel, please. Does she know I cut him off? Does Sophie know who you are? I don't think so. Elena never told her my real name. She probably doesn't even know I live in Portland. I thought about Sophie's wistful comment about someday meeting someone with the same birth arc, about recognizing her father. She'd been sitting 3 feet away from him all evening and had no idea. Show me, I said suddenly. What your birthmark show me? Damon looked confused, but he rolled up his left sleeve and pulled aside his collar, revealing the crescent-shaped mark on his shoulder. It was exactly the same as Sophie's. The same size. The same shape. The same dark coloring against pale skin. Jesus, I whispered. She's really yours. Yes. The word came out as barely more than a breath. I stared at the mark that had been hidden under Damien's shirt all these years. The mark that proved beyond any doubt that the young woman sleeping in our guest room was his daughter, our son's half-sister. My stepdaughter, I supposed, though the word felt strange and inadequate. What are we going to do? Damien asked. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I didn't have an immediate answer. What do you do when your husband's secret daughter shows up on Christmas Eve, pregnant and alone? What do you do when you discover that the man you've been married to for 45 years abandoned his own child? I don't know, I said honestly. But I know what we're not going to do. We're not going to lie to her anymore. We're not going to let her leave here without knowing the truth. Muriel, you can't tell her. It would destroy everything. Everything is already destroyed, Damien. You destroyed it 20 years ago when you made the choice to put your comfort above your responsibility. I stood up from the table, suddenly exhausted by the weight of this new reality. That young woman upstairs has spent her entire life wondering about her father, wondering if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted leaving her. She deserves to know the truth. And James? What about James? Finding out he has a half-sister he never knew about. James is a grown man. He'll have to deal with it just like the rest of us. And Alina, you think she's going to accept this? I thought about Alina's behavior at dinner. Her cruel comments about Sophie. Her obvious disdain for anyone she considered beneath her social status. Alina can accept it or she can leave. I honestly don't care anymore. Damien stared at me in shock. You can't mean that. I absolutely mean it. I looked down at my husband, this man who'd kept such a devastating secret for so long, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 20 years, you've let me believe I knew who you were. You've let me build my life on a lie. So yes, I mean every word. I left him sitting at the kitchen table with his whiskey and his guilt and climbed the stairs to our bedroom. But I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I sat by the window that looked out over our backyard, watching the moon through the bare branches of our oak tree and thinking about the young woman sleeping across the hall, Sophie Miller, who'd grown up wondering about her father while he lived just 20 minutes away, who'd lost the only parent she'd ever known 6 months ago and was now facing motherhood alone, who'd shown up on our doorstep asking for water and found herself in the middle of a family crisis she couldn't begin to understand. Tomorrow, I would have to tell her the truth. Tomorrow, I would have to watch her face when she learned that the man who'd refused her a glass of water was her father. Tomorrow, I would have to help her decide what to do with information that would change everything. But tonight, I sat by my window and grieved for the family I thought I had, for the marriage I'd believed was solid, and for the 20 years of lies that had brought us to this moment. Outside, snow had finally begun to fall, dusting our yard with white that would be gone by morning, just like everything else I'd thought was permanent in my life. I woke up on Christmas morning to the sound of crying. For a moment, disoriented by exhaustion and the gray light filtering through my bedroom window. I thought it might be a baby. Then reality crashed back over me, and I realized the soft sobbing was coming from the guest room. Sophie. I pulled on my robe and padded quietly across the hall, tapping gently on her door. Sophie, sweetheart, are you all right? The crying stopped abruptly. I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just missing my mom. I opened the door and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed in yesterday's clothes. Her face stray with tears. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Oh, honey. I sat down beside her, instinctively reaching out to smooth her hair back from her face. First holidays are always the hardest. She loved Christmas so much, Sophie whispered. She'd start playing carols in November, would make these elaborate plans for decorating our tiny apartment. We never had much money, but she always found a way to make it special. I thought about our perfectly decorated tree downstairs, professionally arranged and expensively beautiful, but empty of the kind of memories Sophie was describing. She sounds like she was an amazing mother. She was everything to me. I don't know how to do this without her. Sophie's hand moved to her belly. I don't know how to be a mother without my mother. The irony cut deep. Here was Damon's daughter mourning the loss of the only parent she'd ever known while her biological father slept just down the hall. Elena Martinez had been everything to her child because she'd had to be, because Damien had abandoned them both. Sophie, I said carefully, I need to tell you something about last night, about my husband's reaction to you. She looked up at me with those dark eyes that were so much like Elena's, according to Damien's guilty confession. Is he okay? He seemed really upset. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on a lie? How do you explain that the father they've wondered about their whole life has been living 20 minutes away, building a comfortable existence while they struggled? Damien recognized you? I said slowly. Not you specifically, but your mother's name, Sophie. There's something you need to know about your father, about David Miller. Sophie went very still. What do you mean David Miller wasn't his real name? Your mother gave you a false name to protect you, protect me from what I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything for this young woman, from the truth that your father was a married man who abandoned your mother when she told him she was pregnant. The color drained from Sophie's face. How do you know that? Because your father is my husband. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the old house settling around us. Could hear Damien moving around downstairs in the kitchen, probably making coffee and pretending this was a normal Christmas morning. That's impossible, Sophie whispered finally. I wish it were. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away from me. Sophie, I know this is shocking, You're lying." She stood up abruptly, backing toward the window. "This is some kind of sick joke. Why would you say something like that?" "Because it's the truth. Your mother's name was Elena Martinez. She worked for catering companies. Met my husband at business conferences in the summer of 2002. When she told him she was pregnant, he gave her money to disappear and told her never to contact him again." Sophie's breathing became rapid and shallow. She pressed her back against the window, one hand protectively over her belly. No. My mother would have told me. She wouldn't have kept something like that from me. She was trying to protect you, just like she protected you by giving you a false name for your father. Prove it." Sophie's voice was fierce now, angry. "If what you're saying is true, prove it." "Ma, I thought about the birth arc, about the way Damien had reacted to her presence, about all the small details that had been adding up since she walked through our door. The birth arc on your wrist. Damien has the same one in the same place." Sophie looked down at her wrist as if she'd never seen the crescent-shaped mark before. Lots of people have birthmarks. Not like that one, and not in that exact spot. I stood up slowly, trying not to frighten her further. "Sophie, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's the last thing you expected to hear, but I couldn't let you leave here without knowing the truth." "The truth?" Sophie's voice cracked. "The truth is that my mother worked herself to death trying to provide for me. The truth is that she cleaned other people's houses and did laundry at the hospital and never complained. Not once. The truth is that she told me my father was a good man who just couldn't be part of our lives." Each word hit me like a physical blow. Elena Martinez had protected Damien even after he'd abandoned her, had let their daughter believe her father was a good man rather than the coward he actually was. She lied to protect him. Sophie continued, tears streaming down her face. Now she spent 20 years protecting a man who threw us away like garbage. "She lied to protect you," I said gently. "So you wouldn't spend your childhood knowing your father had chosen not to be part of your life. Well, now I know anyway, don't I?" Sophie's voice was bitter now, hard in a way that made her sound older than her 20 years. "Now I know that while my mother was working 2 jobs and skipping meals so I could eat. My father was living in a nice house with his real family, pretending we didn't exist." The pain in her voice was unbearable. I wanted to comfort her, to somehow make this revelation less devastating, but there was no way to soften this kind of betrayal. "Sophie, does he know I'm here? Does he know who I am?" "Yes, he's known since last night." She laughed, but it was a broken sound. "And he still hasn't said anything to me. Even now, knowing who I am, he can't acknowledge me. He's scared. I don't care if he's scared." Sophie's voice rose, and I heard movement from downstairs. Damien and probably James responding to the sound. I've been scared my entire life. Scared we wouldn't have enough money for rent. Scared my mom would get sick and I'd be alone. Scared I'd end up like her, working myself to death for people who see me as invisible. But I never had a choice about being scared. He did. Heavy footsteps on the stairs told me that this conversation was about to become much more complicated. James appeared in the doorway first, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing the pajama pants and t-shirt he'd probably had since college. "Mom, is everything okay?" We heard shouting. Behind him came Damien, fully dressed, despite the early hour, his face gray with exhaustion and dread. When his eyes met Sophie's, she went completely still. "So," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "you're my father." James looked confused, glancing between Sophie and his parents. "What's going on?" "Your father," I said, never taking my eyes off Damien. "Had an affair 20 years ago. This young woman is your half-sister." The words landed like grenades in our small guest room. James's mouth fell open. Damien gripped the doorframe like he might fall without support. "That's impossible," James said weakly. "Dad would never." "Show her," I said to Damon. "Show her the birth arc. Muriel, show her." With shaking hands, Damon rolled up his sleeve and pulled aside his collar, revealing the crescent-shaped mark on his shoulder. Sophie stared at it, then looked down at her own wrist, comparing the two marks that were identical in every detail. "Oh my God," James breathed. "Oh my God, it's true." Sophie's composure finally cracked completely. She sank down onto the bed, sobbing with a desperation that shook her entire body. 20 years, she gasped between sobs. 20 years. My mother struggled alone while you lived here with your real family. Sophie, please. Damien tried to step into the room, but she recoiled from him so violently that he stopped immediately. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you abandoned a pregnant woman. How you let your daughter grow up in poverty while you lived comfortably, 20 minutes away." Sophie wiped her face with her sleeves, her eyes blazing with fury. "Did you ever think about us? Did you ever wonder if we were okay?" Damien's silence was answer enough. "My mother died 6 months ago." Sophie continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. "Cancer. We couldn't afford good treatment, couldn't afford to take time off work. She died in a charity ward, asking me to forgive her for not giving me a better life. I sent money." Damien started. When did you send money?" "The first few years. Cashier's checks. We never got any money from you, ever. My mother worked herself into the ground to support us." Sophie stood up, facing Damien with a courage that reminded me painfully of myself at that age. "Do you know what she told me before she died? She said she was sorry. She couldn't give me a father. That every child deserved 2 parents. And she'd failed me by not being able to provide that." Damon was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. "Elena always said, 'Don't say her name.'" Sophie's voice was sharp as broken glass. "You don't get to say her name. You gave up that right when you abandoned her." From downstairs came the sound of footsteps and Alina's voice calling up the stairs. "What's all the noise about? Some of us are trying to sleep. This should be interesting," James muttered, looking like he might be sick. Alina appeared in the doorway wearing an expensive silk robe, her hair perfectly arranged despite having just woken up. When she saw all of us crowded into the guest room with Sophie crying and Damon looking like he might collapse, her expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. "What's happening?" "Sophie is James's half-sister," I said bluntly. "Damien is her father." For a moment, Alina just stared at us like we were speaking a foreign language. Then she started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that comes from finding something funny, but the hysterical kind that happens when reality becomes too absurd to process. "You're kidding, right? This is some kind of Christmas joke." "I wish it were," I said. Alina's laughter stopped abruptly. She looked at Sophie with new eyes, taking in the birthmark, the resemblance to Damien that was more obvious now that we knew what to look for. "Well," she said finally, her voice cold as winter wind. "This explains a lot about last night." Alina James started. "Does this mean she's going to expect money inheritance rights? Because I should point out that illegitimate children don't automatically get out," Sophie said quietly. "Excuse me," I said, "get out." Sophie stood up, and despite being 7 months pregnant and half Alina's size, there was something in her presence that made my polished, privileged daughter-in-law take a step backward. "I don't want your money. I don't want anything from any of you. I just want you to get out of my sight." Alina's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home?" "It's not your home," I said sharply. "It's mine, and if anyone should be leaving, it's you." The look Alina gave me was pure venom. "Fine, but don't expect me to be part of this family drama. I married James, not his father's bastard children." The word bastard hung in the air like a curse. Sophie flinched as if she'd been slapped, but her spine straightened. "You're right," she said with dignity that shamed all of us. "I'm a bastard. My mother was unmarried when she had me, and my father abandoned us both. But at least I know what it's like to work for what I have. At least I know the value of loyalty and sacrifice, which is more than I can say for you." Alina opened her mouth to respond, but James cut her off. "That's enough, both of you." He looked around the room at his family, his father, who'd been lying for 20 years, his mother, who'd just discovered her husband's betrayal, his pregnant half-sister, who'd shown up on their doorstep, and his wife, who was treating the situation like a social embarrassment rather than a human tragedy. "I need some air," he said, and left the room. Alina followed him, her silk robe billowing dramatically behind her, like she was exiting a stage. That left Sophie, Damien, and me in the guest room that suddenly felt too small to contain all the pain and anger and secrets that had been revealed. "I should go," Sophie said quietly, reaching for her thin coat. "No," I said firmly. "You shouldn't. Not like this." "Why?" She looked at me with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "So you can all figure out how to deal with the inconvenience I represent. So your husband can explain why he threw away his own child. So we can figure out how to make this right," I said. Sophie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There is no making this right. You can't give me back my mother. You can't give me back the 20 years I spent wondering about my father. You can't undo the damage that was done." She was right, and we all knew it. Some betrayals are too deep, some abandonment too complete to be repaired with apologies and good intentions. But as I watched Sophie gather her few belongings, preparing to walk out of our lives, as suddenly as she'd entered them, I knew that letting her go would be the final betrayal, the last in a long line of failures by the Patterson family. "Sophie," I said as she moved toward the door, "you don't have to forgive us. You don't have to be part of our family, but please don't leave thinking that what happened to you and your mother was acceptable. Please don't leave thinking that you don't matter." She paused in the doorway, not looking back. "The problem isn't that I think I don't matter, Mrs. Patterson. The problem is that for 20 years, none of you thought I mattered either." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her shampoo and the weight of truth that couldn't be unspoken. I found Sophie sitting on our front porch steps, her thin coat wrapped around her shoulders like armor that couldn't possibly protect her from the December cold. She wasn't crying anymore, but her face was set in the kind of blank expression that comes after tears have been exhausted. "The buses don't run on Christmas Day," I said, settling down beside her despite the freezing concrete. "I'll walk. You're 7 months pregnant, Sophie. You can't walk across Portland in this weather." She didn't respond, just stared out at our quiet street with its perfect houses and manicured lawns. I wondered what she was seeing. The life she might have had if her father had made different choices. The neighborhood where she'd never quite belonged. Behind us, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. James and Alina were arguing in the kitchen, their words muffled, but their anger crystal clear. Damien was probably hiding in his study the way he always did when confronted with problems he didn't want to face. "I meant what I said," Sophie said quietly. "I don't want anything from your family. I just want to disappear and pretend this never happened." "Is that what your mother would have wanted?" Sophie's composure cracked slightly. "My mother would have wanted me to be happy. She would have wanted me to build a good life for my baby without getting tangled up in other people's mistakes." "And what about what you want?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want my mother back. I want to not be alone. I want my baby to have a family that actually wants him." She laughed bitterly. "But we don't always get what we want, do we?" The front door opened behind us, and James stepped out onto the porch. He dressed hastily in jeans and a sweater, his hair still disheveled. He looked at Sophie like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Sophie glanced at me, then back at James. "I suppose." James sat down on the step below us, turning to face Sophie directly. For a moment, they just studied each other. Two people who shared a father, but had lived completely different lives. "I'm sorry," James said finally, "for what my father did to you and your mother. for what our family did. Your family didn't do anything, Sophie replied. Your father did. There's a difference, is there? We all benefited from his choice to abandon you. Every comfort I had growing up, every opportunity, every advantage, it all came at your expense. I watched my son grapple with this new reality with the knowledge that his privileged childhood had been built on his father's betrayal of another family. It was painful to see, but also necessary. You didn't know, Sophie said, and there was no bitterness in her voice now, just exhaustion. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't make it your fault. They sat in silence for a moment. Two siblings who should have grown up together, who should have known each other's secrets and shared each other's burdens. What's she like? Sophie asked suddenly. Your wife James sighed. Alina is complicated. She wasn't always like this. When we first met, she was different kinder. What changed, Money? I think. Status. The longer we've been married, the more important those things have become to her. James looked down at his hands. I should have seen it sooner. Should have recognized what she was becoming. The front door slammed open with enough force to shake the house. Alina stood in the doorway, fully dressed now in designer clothes that probably cost more than Sophie made in a month. I can't believe you're all out here having some kind of family bonding session, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. James, get in the car. We're leaving. We're not going anywhere, James replied, not moving from the steps. Excuse me, I said. We're not leaving. This is my family, Alina. All of it, including Sophie. Alina's face went white, then red, then white again. That girl is not your family. She's a stranger who showed up here yesterday with some sob story. That girl is my half-sister, James said, standing up slowly. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you should leave. The look Alina gave him was pure poison. Fine, but don't expect me to be here when you come to your senses. She stormed back into the house, and within minutes we could hear her upstairs slamming drawers and throwing things into suitcases. James winced at each crash but didn't move to stop her. Are you sure about this? Sophie asked him quietly. I don't want to be the reason your marriage ends. You're not the reason, James said. You're just the catalyst. This has been building for years. I've just been too much of a coward to face it. 20 minutes later, Alina emerged from the house dragging 2 large suitcases, her face set in lines of fury and wounded pride. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps looking up at James with something that might have been hope. Last chance, she said. Choose your real family or choose her. James stood up and I held my breath, wondering if he would cave under the pressure the way his father had 20 years ago. Instead, he walked down the steps and kissed Alina's cheek gently. Take care of yourself, he said softly. Alina stared at him for a long moment, then turned to Sophie. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed a marriage that took 5 years to build. I didn't destroy anything, Sophie replied calmly. I just revealed what was already broken. Alina's Mercedes roared to life with unnecessary drama, and she peeled out of our driveway like she was fleeing a crime scene. We watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Well, James said, settling back down on the steps. That happened. I'm sorry, Sophie said again. Don't be. I should have stood up to her years ago. Maybe if I had, she wouldn't have turned into someone who could be so cruel to a pregnant woman. The front door opened more quietly this time, and Damien appeared. He looked like he'd aged another decade in the past few hours, his face gray and haggarded. Sophie, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Sophie said, without looking at him. You made your choice 20 years ago. I'm making mine now. I was wrong. I know that now. I was scared and selfish, and I made the worst decision of my life. The worst decision of your life was the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophie said fiercely. Because it meant I got to be raised by Elena Martinez, who was worth 10 of you, who taught me what real love looks like, what sacrifice means, what it is to put someone else's needs before your own. Damien flinched as if she'd slapped him. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're right, you don't. And I'm not going to give it to you just to make yourself feel better about the choices you made. Then what can I do? How can I make this right? Sophie stood up slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. You can't. Some things can't be fixed, Mr. Patterson. Some wounds don't heal. She started walking down the steps, but I caught her arm gently. Sophie, wait. I can't do this anymore, Mrs. Patterson. I can't sit here and listen to him try to justify abandoning my mother. I need to go. Where will you go? I don't know. I'll figure something out. I always do. That's when something inside me snapped. This brave young woman carrying my husband's grandchild, preparing to face homelessness, rather than accept help from the family that had already failed her once. The same pattern repeating itself. The Patterson men abandoning their responsibilities, while the women paid the price. No, I said, standing up. You're not going anywhere. Sophie looked at me in surprise. What? I turned to face Damien, and for the first time in 45 years of marriage, I let him see exactly what I thought of him. Get out, I said. Muriel. I said, get out. Pack your things and leave now. You can't be serious. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my banking app, showing him the screen. I've been paying the mortgage for the past 3 years while you invested our money in schemes that never paid off. The house is in my name, bought with my inheritance from my mother. So when I tell you to get out, I mean it. Damien stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the woman who would have quietly accepted his betrayal and helped him cover it up had died the moment Sophie walked through our door. Where am I supposed to go? I honestly don't care. Find an apartment, stay at a hotel, move in with one of your golf buddies. Just get out of my sight, Muriel, please. We can work through this. We've been married 45 years. 45 years built on a lie. I won't spend one more day pretending to be married to a man who could abandon his own child. James was staring at me with something approaching awe. Sophie looked stunned. Even I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. You have 1 hour, I continued. Take whatever you need and go. We'll figure out the rest through lawyers. Damien looked like he might argue further, but something in my expression stopped him. He turned and walked back into the house, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Sophie sank back down onto the steps. You didn't have to do that. I don't expect you to choose me over your husband. I'm not choosing you over my husband, I said, sitting down beside her. I'm choosing right over wrong. I'm choosing the family I want to build instead of the family I inherited. What does that mean? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything for both of us. It means I'm asking you to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone we're helping out of obligation, as family, as my daughter-in-law, if you'll have me. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and strong. I know you honor your mother's memory every day by the way you carry yourself. I know my grandchild is lucky to have you as a mother. Your grandchild. That baby you're carrying is my grandchild, whether Damien acknowledges it or not. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let another Patterson abandon their responsibilities. Sophie was crying again, but these were different tears. Not tears of pain or anger, but something deeper. Something that looked like hope. I don't know how to be part of a family, she whispered. It's just been me and Mom for so long. Then we'll learn together, I said, taking her hand. We'll figure it out as we go. Through the front window, we could see Damien moving around upstairs, packing 45 years of marriage into suitcases. In the kitchen, James was making coffee, probably trying to process the fact that his entire world had shifted in the span of 24 hours. But on the front porch, in the cold December air, something new was being born. Not the family any of us had planned, but we chose the family we deserved. Sophie, I said, squeezing her hand gently. Welcome home. 6 months later, I woke up to the sound I'd been waiting my entire life to hear. My grandson crying in the nursery down the hall. Not the angry, desperate wail of hunger or discomfort, but the healthy, indignant cry of a baby who just discovered he had an opinion about the world. I pulled on my robe and padded quietly to the room that had once been Damien's study, now transformed into a nursery with soft yellow walls and hand-painted animals that Sophie and I had worked on together during her last trimester. The morning light filtered through gauze curtains, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. Sophie was already there, of course, lifting little Gabriel from his crib with the practiced ease of someone who'd been a mother for exactly 3 weeks, but seemed to have been born to the role. She looked up when she heard me in the doorway, her face lighting up with the kind of smile I'd never seen from her during those early, difficult days. "Good morning, Grandma," she said softly, and my heart did a little flip the way it did every time she called me that. "Someone's ready for his breakfast." I moved into the room, marveling again at how perfectly Gabriel fit into Sophie's arms. How natural she looked, despite being only 21 and having no experience with babies. Elena Nena had raised her daughter well, had given her the confidence and strength she needed to face motherhood alone. Though she wasn't alone anymore. "He's got your eyes," I said, stroking Gabriel's tiny fist as he latched onto Sophie with single-minded determination. "He's got his grandfather's stubborn streak," Sophie replied with a laugh. "Look how he grips my finger. He's not letting go of anything." We'd learned to talk about Damien in neutral tones. For Gabriel's sake, if nothing else, not with bitterness or anger, but with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance you use when discussing someone who exists but isn't part of your daily life, like a distant relative or an old neighbor who'd moved away. The truth was, I rarely thought about Damien anymore. Oh, I knew where he was. Living in a one-bedroom apartment downtown, working part-time at an insurance agency since his investments had never materialized into anything resembling income. James saw him occasionally for awkward coffee meetings that never lasted more than an hour. But the man who'd shared my bed for 45 years felt like someone I'd known in a previous lifetime. Someone I'd been fond of, but hadn't really understood. James left early for his appointment with the lawyer, Sophie said, settling into the rocking chair we'd found at an estate sale and refinished together. He said to tell you he'll call later with an update. James had been handling my divorce proceedings with the methodical attention to detail that made him an excellent accountant. We divided everything fairly. Damien had taken his clothes, his golf clubs, and half our savings. I'd kept the house, the furniture my mother had left me, and the family I was building with Sophie and Gabriel. It hadn't been particularly complicated or dramatic. After 45 years together, we'd simply separated like two people walking down different paths who eventually realized they can no longer see each other in the distance. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked, settling into the window seat where I'd spent so many early mornings during Sophie's pregnancy, watching her navigate morning sickness with the same quiet dignity she applied to everything else. Better than I expected. Gabriel only woke up twice and he went right back to sleep after feeding. Sophie looked down at her son with the kind of wonder that never seemed to fade. I keep thinking Mom would have loved this. The middle of the night, feeding's the way he makes those little sigh when he's content. She always said babies were proof that the world was still full of magic. I'd learned not to feel sad when Sophie talked about Elena. Instead, I felt grateful. Grateful that this remarkable woman had raised such a remarkable daughter, had instilled in her the strength and grace that made her such an incredible mother. Grateful that Elena's love lived on in Sophie and now in Gabriel. She's part of him, you know, I said quietly. All the love she gave you, all the lessons she taught you. Gabriel will inherit all of that. Sophie nodded, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. She'd grown stronger over the past months, more confident in her place in our little family. The scared, pregnant girl who'd shown up on our doorstep on Christmas Eve had transformed into a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. The doorbell rang downstairs, and I checked the clock. 7:30 in the morning, too early for casual visitors. I'll get it, I said, kissing Gabriel's forehead before heading downstairs. Through the peephole, I could see Damien standing on our front porch looking older and somehow smaller than he had 6 months ago. He was holding a small wrapped package and shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Damien Muriel. I know it's early, but I wanted to. I brought something for the baby. He held out the package, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. Whether from nervousness or something else, I couldn't tell, and didn't particularly care. You could have called first. Would you have answered? Probably not. I took the package, but didn't open it. What do you want, Damien? I want to meet my grandson. I want to apologize to Sophie. I want to try to make things right. And what makes you think any of us want that? He was quiet for a long moment, staring past me into the house he'd shared with me for so many years. Because I'm dying, Muriel. The words hit me like a physical blow. But I didn't let my expression change. What, lung cancer stage 3? The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less. I gripped the door frame, processing this information. After everything that had happened, everything he'd done, my first instinct was still to comfort him. 45 years of marriage don't disappear overnight, even when the foundation was built on lies. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I don't want to die without meeting my grandson, without telling Sophie how sorry I am for what I did to her and her mother. Sophie doesn't owe you forgiveness just because you're dying. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for 5 minutes to tell her that abandoning her was the worst thing I ever did. That not knowing her has been the greatest loss of my life. I looked at this man I'd once loved. This man who'd given me James and 45 years of companionship. This man who'd also betrayed his own daughter and let another woman raise her alone. He looked tired and scared and smaller than I remembered. Wait here, I said. I found Sophie in the kitchen warming a bottle, even though Gabriel was clearly satisfied from nursing. She looked up when I entered, taking in my expression immediately. Everything okay? Damien's here. He wants to meet Gabriel and talk to you. Sophie went very still. Does he know about... She gestured toward Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his carrier on the counter. He knows he has a grandson, Sophie. There's something else. He's sick. Cancer. He says he doesn't have long. I watched emotions flicker across Sophie's face. Anger, sadness, confusion, and something that might have been pity. She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. What do you think I should do? She asked finally. I think you should do whatever feels right to you, whatever you can live with. Sophie looked down at Gabriel, this perfect little boy who would grow up knowing he was wanted and loved, who would never wonder about his family or his place in the world. She touched his tiny hand, and he wrapped his fingers around hers instinctively. 5 minutes, she said quietly. In the living room, you stay with us. I nodded and went back to the front door where Damien was still waiting. He looked hopeful and terrified in equal measure. 5 minutes, I told him. In the living room, I stay with you the whole time. Thank you. I led him into our living room, the same room where we'd hosted Christmas Eve dinner 6 months ago, where Sophie had sat at our table and changed all our lives forever. Sophie was already there, holding Gabriel, her expression carefully neutral. Damon stopped just inside the doorway, staring at his daughter and grandson like he was trying to memorize them. The resemblance between him and Sophie was obvious now that I knew to look for it. The same stubborn chin, the same dark eyes, the same way of carrying themselves with quiet dignity even in difficult circumstances. "Sophie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me see you." She didn't respond, just waited for him to say whatever he'd come to say. "I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know there's nothing I can say that will make up for what I did to you and your mother. But I need you to know that abandoning you was the biggest mistake of my life." Sophie's expression didn't change. "Why now? Because you're dying?" "No. I've known it was wrong from the beginning. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. Too selfish to face the consequences of my choices." And now Damien's face crumpled. "Now I'm running out of time to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were little and scared. I'm sorry your mother had to work so hard because I wasn't helping. I'm sorry you grew up thinking your father didn't want you, because the truth is, I thought about you every day. If you thought about me every day, why didn't you ever try to find me? Because I was afraid you'd reject me. Because I was afraid of what it would do to my marriage, to my relationship with James. Because I was selfish and weak and convinced myself that you were better off without me." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, studying this man who was her father, but had never been her dad. Gabriel stirred in her arms, making the tiny mooing sounds babies make when they're dreaming. "You're right," she said finally. "I was better off without you." Elena Martinez was the best parent any child could ask for. She gave me everything I needed: love, stability, values, strength. She taught me how to work hard and how to be kind and how to take care of the people I love. Damien's face cracked with pain, but Sophie wasn't finished. "But you want to know what the difference is between you and her? When she was dying, she spent her last days making sure I knew how loved I was, how proud she was of the woman I'd become. She used her final words to build me up, not tear me down." Sophie stood up, shifting Gabriel to her shoulder. "You abandoned me once because you were afraid of facing the consequences of your choices. I won't let you abandon my son the same way." What does that mean? It means if you want to be part of Gabriel's life, you have to prove you're capable of putting someone else's needs before your own. It means showing up consistently, not just when it's convenient or when you're feeling guilty. Damien's eyes filled with hope. "You'd let me be part of his life. I'd let you try to earn that privilege. But the first time you disappoint him, the first time you let him down the way you let me down, you're done. No second chances, no excuses. Gabriel deserves better than that. I understand, do you?" Because being a grandfather isn't about showing up for the fun parts. It's about being there for the hard parts, too. It's about putting Gabriel's needs above your own comfort, your own fears, your own selfish desires. Damien nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I want to try. I want to be better than I was." Sophie looked at me, and I saw Elena's strength in her eyes, Elena's wisdom in the set of her jaw. "We'll see." She walked over to Damien, stopping just close enough for him to get a good look at Gabriel. "This is your grandson. His name is Gabriel James Martinez Patterson. He's 3 weeks old. He loves to be held, and he's already the smartest baby who ever lived." Damien stared down at Gabriel with wonder and heartbreak and love all mixed together. "He's perfect. Yes, he is. And he's going to grow up knowing exactly how loved and wanted he is. That's a promise." Can I hold him?" Sophie hesitated, then carefully transferred Gabriel to his grandfather's arms. Damien held him like he was made of spun glass, tears falling freely onto the baby's blanket. "Hello, Gabriel," he whispered. "I'm your grandfather, and I promise you, I'm going to do better by you than I did by your mother." We stayed like that for several minutes, 3 generations of a family that had been broken and was slowly learning how to heal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the reunion any of us would have chosen. But it was honest. And that was more than we'd had before. When Gabriel started fussing, Sophie took him back. He's hungry again. Growing boys need constant fuel. Damien nodded, reluctant to let the moment end. Thank you for letting me meet him. For giving me a chance I don't deserve. You don't deserve it, Sophie agreed. But Gabriel does. Every child deserves to know their family, even when that family is complicated. After Damien left, Sophie and I sat in our kitchen while Gabriel napped in his carrier. The morning sun streamed through our windows, illuminating the drawings Sophie had made for the nursery, the shopping lists, in both our handwriting on the refrigerator, the family photos that now included pictures of Gabriel and Sophie, alongside the older ones of James and me. Do you think I did the right thing? Sophie asked, stirring honey into her tea. I think you did the brave thing, which isn't always the same as the right thing, but it's usually close. I'm scared he'll hurt Gabriel the way he hurt me. If he does, we'll protect Gabriel the same way Elena protected you. But Sophie, you have something Elena didn't have. What's that a family that will stand behind you? James will be the best uncle that boy could ask for. I'll be the grandmother who spoils him rotten and teaches him how to bake cookies and tells him stories about all the strong women in his family. And you'll be the mother who loves him enough to set boundaries to demand better from the people in his life. Sophie smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I never thought I'd have this. A real family, a home where I belong. You belong here. You and Gabriel both. This is your home for as long as you want it. Even when Gabriel gets older, even when he's running around making noise and breaking things. Especially then, this house has been too quiet for too long. It needs the sound of children laughing, of family dinners that get loud and messy, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings with too much wrapping paper and not enough coffee. Through the window, I could see our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, hanging laundry on her line, humming softly to herself. In the distance, the church bells were chiming 9 o'clock, marking another hour in what felt like the first day of the rest of our lives. Gabriel stirred in his carrier, making the little grunting sounds that meant he'd be awake soon and ready for his next adventure. Sophie finished her tea and stood up, smoothing down his blanket. "Come on, little man," she said softly. "Let's go see what the world has to offer today." As I watched Sophie carry my grandson upstairs to change his diaper, as I listened to her talking to him in the gentle voice that reminded me so much of Elena, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and utter contentment. The family I thought I had for 45 years had been built on secrets and lies and the convenient pretense that some people mattered more than others. But this family, this small, unlikely group of people who'd found each other through pain and chose each other through love. This was real. This was home. And Gabriel James Martinez, Patterson, sleeping peacefully upstairs in his nursery with his brave young mother watching over him, would grow up knowing exactly where he belonged with us. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until